Let's get to Ford. American-bred Ford now on the hunt for real estate, possibly outside the U.S. Ford announcing it is going to move the manufacturing of its Focus and its C-Max from Wayne, Michigan to a new location.
Ford just detonated a bombshell that could change the American economy forever. In a stunning move, the legendary automaker announced plans to shift major electric vehicle production overseas, igniting a political firestorm. And within hours, President Donald Trump fired back. His response? A direct economic assault that threatens to cripple Ford's global ambitions and shake Wall Street to its core. This isn't just about cars. It's about American jobs, factories, and the very future of U.S. manufacturing. So how did it all explode so quickly? And why is Trump willing to go to war over it? What's happening? At a packed rally in Toledo, Ohio, just miles from one of the shuttered plants, Trump delivered his message loud and clear. Ford made its name in America, built its fortune off the backs of American workers, and now they want to run away, he thundered. We're not going to let them. Trump's retaliation came swiftly in the form of tariffs. He announced a 150% tariff on any Ford vehicle manufactured outside the United States and imported back into the American market. The tariffs didn't stop there. Trump also expanded levies on automotive parts sourced from overseas, aiming to make it financially impossible for Ford to outsource its electric vehicle production. But Trump's message wasn't just about economics. It was political theater with real consequences. He painted Ford as a symbol of corporate greed and betrayal, using their decision as proof of why America needed stronger, more aggressive economic nationalism. The conflict between Trump and Ford had become a full-blown economic war. But what neither side anticipated was how global supply chains would react. Ford's global expansion gamble shattered the fragile trust it had built with American workers over the past century, and that betrayal would soon come back to haunt them. The financial fallout was brutal. Ford's stock price plummeted by over 20% in the span of 2 months. Credit rating agencies downgraded the company's debt, citing strategic missteps and heightened geopolitical risk. What was meant to be a bold step into the future had become an unmitigated disaster. But the worst blow wasn't financial, it was cultural. Ford's global expansion gamble shattered the fragile trust it had built with American workers over the past century. That betrayal would soon come back to haunt them. The supply chain gamble. Ford's gamble to shift production overseas was supposed to be a strategic masterstroke. By moving electric vehicle manufacturing to lower-cost regions like South Korea and Germany, the company hoped to slash production costs, avoid tariffs on imported materials, and stay ahead of competitors. In theory, it made sense, but in practice, it backfired spectacularly. The first cracks appeared within weeks. Overseas factories rushed into operation to meet production deadlines, struggled with quality control issues and logistical bottlenecks. Shipments of batteries and key components were delayed due to port congestion and stricter customs inspections, many of which were retaliatory measures enacted by countries caught in Trump's escalating trade war. To make matters worse, the tariffs imposed by Trump had a chilling effect on Ford's global partners. Suppliers in Mexico, Canada, and Europe began renegotiating contracts, demanding higher prices to offset new trade barriers. The cost savings Ford had hoped to achieve by outsourcing production evaporated almost overnight. Consumer confidence also took a hit. Loyal Ford customers expressed outrage at the company's decision to move jobs overseas, vowing to boycott the brand. Sales of Ford's new electric vehicle models stumbled in key markets like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, the very states Ford had hoped to court with its domestic electric vehicle rollout. How Middle America turned on Ford overnight. The backlash against Ford's decision to move electric vehicle production overseas wasn't limited to economists, politicians, or corporate boardrooms. It hit hardest in the heartland, in Middle America, where Ford factories once symbolized the American dream. The anger was palpable. Laid-off workers flooded town halls, demanding answers from local officials. Small business owners in factory towns reported sharp declines in revenue as laid-off employees cut back on spending. Community leaders warned that Ford's decision would accelerate the decline of already struggling towns, turning once thriving communities into economic ghost towns. But the backlash wasn't just local, it was national. News outlets across the political spectrum covered the growing outrage. Headlines like, "Ford turns its back on America," and "Corporate betrayal in the heartland" dominated the airwaves. Social media exploded with videos of laid-off workers and angry protests outside shuttered plants. The political fallout was immediate. Lawmakers from both parties introduced legislation aimed at punishing companies that outsourced American jobs. Trump's approval ratings in manufacturing states surged, fueled by his aggressive stance against Ford. Ford's leadership attempted damage control, launching a multi-million-dollar public relations campaign highlighting its ongoing investments in American manufacturing. But the damage was already done for millions of Americans. Ford's decision was unforgivable, a corporate betrayal that symbolized everything wrong with globalization and corporate greed. By the time Ford realized the depth of the backlash, it was too late. The company's brand, once synonymous with American pride, had become a cautionary tale of how quickly public trust can vanish. But while Ford faced public outrage, the financial markets were about to deliver an even bigger punishment: how Trump's war crushed Ford's stock. The fallout from Donald Trump's aggressive economic assault on Ford Motor Company wasn't just confined to factories, workers, or political rallies. It spread like wildfire into the heart of America's financial system. The moment Trump announced sweeping tariffs targeting automakers outsourcing production, Wall Street reacted with brutal efficiency. Investors panicked, and Ford's stock bore the brunt of the collapse. Ford's decision to shift electric vehicle production overseas had already unsettled the markets. But when Trump retaliated by threatening tariffs on every foreign-made Ford vehicle, the message to investors was clear. This was no longer a routine trade spat. It was an all-out economic war with one of America's most iconic companies caught in the crossfire. In the days following Trump's announcement, Ford's stock price plummeted. Within 72 hours, it shed nearly 25% of its market value. Institutional investors began dumping shares, citing uncertainty over production costs, foreign market retaliation, and the growing risk of an all-out trade war. Analysts on cable news warned of further declines, triggering panic selling across the board. The collapse didn't stop at Ford. Major indices like the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the S&P 500 dipped sharply, as traders feared Trump's attack on Ford could be a preview of broader crackdowns on other multinational corporations. But Ford was the epicenter of the storm. Hedge funds, pension funds, and retail investors all scrambled to exit their positions, unwilling to gamble on a company directly in Trump's crosshairs. For Ford's leadership, the financial fallout was devastating. The company faced mounting pressure from shareholders demanding answers, forcing executives to call emergency meetings and issue statements attempting to calm the markets. But no amount of reassurance could undo the damage. Trump's economic war had shattered investor confidence, and Ford's stock was in freefall. The broader consequence of this sell-off went far beyond Wall Street. As Ford's valuation crumbled, so too did the retirement accounts, pensions, and savings plans of ordinary Americans. Tens of thousands of Ford employees, retirees, and investors watched their financial futures evaporate virtually overnight. The crash had become personal, and the anger was only beginning. The stock collapse sent shockwaves through Ford's entire business model. But the backlash wasn't limited to investors. On the ground, the company's most loyal allies, its dealerships, were about to rise up in revolt. The dealer revolt. Across the country, Ford's own dealership network, the lifeblood of its retail operation, was preparing to fight back. Ford dealers had always been the face of the brand in small towns and big cities alike. But Trump's tariffs, combined with Ford's outsourcing decisions, ignited a revolt among those who once proudly waved the blue oval banner. The first signs of unrest surfaced in the weeks following the tariff announcement. Dealerships in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania reported plummeting foot traffic. Consumers, frustrated by the prospect of higher vehicle prices and feeling betrayed by Ford's move overseas, began turning away. In response, dealers slashed prices, launched aggressive discount campaigns, and offered record-high trade-in incentives just to keep customers walking through the door. But the problem wasn't just declining sales. Many dealers felt abandoned by Ford's corporate leadership. They had invested millions of dollars in showrooms, service centers, and marketing, based on the promise of American-made vehicles and a stable business model. Now they were watching that promise disintegrate in real time. Dealer associations began organizing meetings, drafting letters to Ford's executive board, and even publicly criticizing the company's decisions. Some threatened to pull back on inventory orders. Others openly called for leadership changes at the top of Ford Motor Company. The growing divide between corporate headquarters and local dealerships became impossible to ignore. The revolt was about more than just business. It was about identity. For many dealers, Ford wasn't just a brand, it was a family legacy, passed down through generations. Trump's tariffs may have triggered the economic crisis, but Ford's decision to outsource was seen as the ultimate betrayal. As the dealer revolt escalated, the cracks in Ford's empire widened, but the damage didn't stop there. On the streets and in the suburbs, the American consumer was beginning to lose faith. Why Americans stopped buying Fords? Consumer trust is fragile. It takes decades to build and only moments to destroy. And in early 2025, Ford learned just how quickly loyalty can evaporate as the media frenzy over Trump's tariffs and Ford's outsourcing intensified. So did the backlash among middle American consumers. In rural communities and working-class suburbs, where Ford pickups and SUVs were once a point of pride, the mood shifted. Customers walked into dealerships not to buy, but to voice their anger. Sales teams reported hostile conversations, with longtime customers accusing Ford of selling out American workers. On social media, hashtags like Boycott Ford and America First Cars began trending, fueled by Trump's base and amplified by conservative media outlets. Sales data told the full story. In the first quarter of 2025, Ford's U.S. vehicle sales dropped by over 30% year-over-year. The iconic F-Series truck, once America's best-selling vehicle, suffered its steepest sales decline in 4 decades. Compact cars, crossovers, and even the highly touted Mustang Mach-E saw sharp declines as consumers defected to rival brands. The consumer exodus wasn't just driven by patriotism, it was also about economics. Trump's tariffs on imported Ford vehicles drove prices higher, leaving many Americans priced out of the market. Competitors like Tesla and General Motors capitalized on the chaos, offering steep discounts and financing deals to lure disillusioned Ford customers. Ford's public relations machine scrambled to stem the bleeding, launching marketing campaigns emphasizing American jobs and community investments. But the damage was done. Ford's brand, once synonymous with American resilience, was now synonymous with corporate betrayal. And if that wasn't enough, the company's ambitious electric vehicle strategy, the very reason they moved production overseas, was about to collapse under the weight of global chaos. The electric vehicle fiasco. The tariffs had already sparked financial panic and consumer outrage. But behind the scenes, Ford's global supply chain was crumbling. The company had invested billions of dollars in production facilities in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, banking on lower costs and faster market access. Instead, those investments became a liability. Foreign governments, responding to Trump's aggressive trade policies, retaliated with their own tariffs and regulatory hurdles. Ford's factories in Germany and Mexico faced new restrictions, while key suppliers in China raised prices or severed contracts entirely. What was supposed to be a streamlined, efficient global operation turned into a logistical nightmare. The chaos extended beyond trade policy. Labor strikes erupted at Ford's overseas plants, fueled by resentment over wage cuts and deteriorating working conditions. Political instability in key markets further disrupted production schedules. Delays, cost overruns, and quality control issues piled up. By mid-2025, Ford was forced to issue a stunning announcement. It was scaling back its global electric vehicle expansion plans. Several planned factories were put on indefinite hold, production targets were slashed, and the company admitted that its strategy to dominate the EV market had failed. For American consumers and investors, the irony was bitter. Ford's attempt to outmaneuver Trump's economic nationalism by going global had backfired spectacularly. The company's reputation was in tatters, its financial position was crumbling, and its once promising electric future had been reduced to a cautionary tale. But as Ford's empire collapsed, a much larger war was brewing, one that would soon engulf Washington itself. The CEO's meltdown. Ford Motor Company's decision to shift a substantial portion of its electric vehicle production overseas did not just spark a public relations nightmare. It triggered a full-scale leadership crisis inside the company itself. Behind closed doors, Ford's top executives found themselves walking a tightrope, trapped between the cold realities of global economics and the fiery wrath of American politics. At the center of this chaos was Chief Executive Officer James Farley, who quickly realized he was no longer steering the company's future, he was fighting for its survival. When the backlash from Donald Trump began, Ford's leadership initially underestimated its ferocity. They believed that public outrage would fade as the facts came out, pointing to their continued investments in American jobs. But what they did not anticipate was how Trump's narrative of betrayal would escalate and take on a life of its own. Farley's internal meetings became crisis calls. Shareholders panicked, and boardroom discussions devolved into finger-pointing sessions. Leaked memos revealed that Ford's executive team was deeply divided. Some argued for a hardline response, defending their global strategy at all costs. Others pleaded to reverse course, fearing permanent damage to the company's image and future sales. Farley, caught in the middle, was forced to navigate impossible choices: abandon the global production shift and risk financial collapse, or stand firm and watch the company's reputation disintegrate. The stress took its toll. In interviews, Farley appeared visibly rattled, struggling to hold the line as Trump's attacks grew louder. Internally, sources reported growing frustration, resignations among key executives, and mounting pressure from investors demanding clarity. Ford's leadership was spiraling, their once confident plan now engulfed in political fire. But the damage would not stop with Ford alone. The crisis was about to spread far beyond Dearborn, dragging the entire American auto industry into a fight it could not escape: the industry fallout. The war that erupted between Donald Trump and Ford Motor Company did not stay contained. Like a domino effect, the turmoil quickly engulfed the entire American automotive industry, pulling in General Motors, Tesla, and countless suppliers caught in the crossfire. Once Trump launched his aggressive tariff campaign targeting countries where Ford planned to expand production, it did not take long before the rest of the auto industry felt the heat. Those tariffs were not surgical. They hit the entire supply chain. Imported materials, batteries, electronics, and even raw metals became exponentially more expensive almost overnight. General Motors was among the first casualties. Their plans to scale electric vehicle production faced the same pressures as Ford's. CEO Mary Barra publicly condemned the tariffs, warning that increased costs would jeopardize American jobs rather than save them. Meanwhile, Tesla, once immune to this type of political battle, also found itself dragged in. Tesla's partnerships in China and reliance on global supply chains meant Trump's tariffs rippled through their bottom line. The result was catastrophic. American automakers slashed production forecasts. Planned factory expansions were delayed or canceled. Layoffs rippled through the Midwest, hitting Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana hard. For an industry that had barely recovered from the financial crash of 2008, Trump's trade war delivered another gut punch. Wall Street reacted predictably. Auto stocks plummeted. Investor confidence vanished. And while Trump continued to position himself as the defender of American industry, the sector he claimed to protect was bleeding out. Yet the economic fallout was only one side of the coin. On the ground, in factories and communities across America, a much more personal rebellion was brewing. How American labor fought back. Ford's decision to offshore electric vehicle production did not just enrage politicians and investors, it enraged American workers. Factory employees who had spent decades on assembly lines suddenly found their futures in question. For them, this was not about corporate strategy or global competitiveness. It was about survival. The anger that erupted across America's industrial heartland was immediate and fierce. Union leaders called emergency meetings. Workers organized protests outside Ford plants in Michigan, Kentucky, and Ohio. They marched with signs reading, "Built by Americans, stolen by Ford," and "Our jobs, our future." It did not take long before the anger boiled over into strikes. In Detroit, workers walked off the job, demanding guarantees that Ford would protect domestic employment. The strikes spread rapidly to other auto plants, suppliers, and related industries. For the first time in decades, the American labor movement was back in the national spotlight, fueled not just by economic hardship, but by a deep sense of betrayal. Trump, ever the political opportunist, seized the moment. He appeared at rallies alongside union leaders, promising to hold corporations accountable. But the labor unrest went beyond partisan lines. Even voters who had no love for Trump found themselves agreeing with the core message: American companies should not abandon American workers. The strikes and protests slowed production, drained resources, and added another layer of chaos to an already unstable industry. And in small towns and rural communities, The impact of this labor revolt would soon turn catastrophic. The supplier collapse. The decision to offshore electric vehicle production meant that Ford canceled or reduced contracts with hundreds of small and mid-sized suppliers. These were not massive corporations. They were family-run machine shops, parts manufacturers, and logistics firms that depended entirely on Ford's business. As orders dried up, factories closed. Thousands of workers lost their jobs. Small businesses from diners to hardware stores saw their customer base disappear overnight. Local governments, already strapped for resources, faced budget shortfalls as tax revenue plummeted. In town halls and community centers, residents gathered in shock, asking the same question: how did it come to this? For decades they had supported Ford, believing that loyalty to an American brand would guarantee economic stability. But that social contract had been shattered. Many of these communities had no plan B. Their economies were so deeply tied to the automotive industry that when Ford faltered, everything collapsed with it. The crisis exposed the fragility of rural and industrial America, revealing how decades of economic policy had left entire regions dependent on the decisions of a few corporate executives. But as these American families faced unemployment, shuttered businesses, and crumbling communities, a far more dangerous storm was brewing in Washington: the White House ultimatum. In a stunning escalation of the Ford controversy, President Donald Trump delivered an ultimatum that left the entire auto industry in shock. He demanded that Ford immediately halt its overseas production plans and recommit to American manufacturing. This was not a polite request. It was a direct order backed by severe consequences: new tariffs, federal penalties, and the threat of a government procurement ban targeting Ford vehicles. Trump's America First campaign had always targeted corporations that outsourced American jobs. But this time, he was not bluffing. He used executive authority and political leverage to pressure Ford's boardroom, signaling to every corporation in America that there would be no room for negotiation. Ford's leadership, already facing public backlash and crumbling investor confidence, was now caught in a political chokehold. Behind closed doors, White House officials offered Ford one way out: commit to opening 2 new American factories within 1 year, and cancel its plans to expand production in Mexico and Germany. If Ford refused, the administration threatened to revoke millions of dollars in federal EV tax credits and government contracts. This was unprecedented in modern corporate history. A U.S. president using the full weight of executive power to force a private company's hand. Trump framed it as defending American workers, but critics warned it was corporate coercion. The ball was now in Ford's court. But while Ford scrambled to respond, Washington itself was spiraling into chaos. The Washington cage match. Trump's showdown with Ford triggered a political civil war inside Congress. Lawmakers quickly split into 2 bitter factions, both using the crisis to fuel their agendas. On one side, Trump's allies celebrated the ultimatum. Populist senators and congressmen rallied behind the president's hardline stance, framing it as a battle to protect the American worker from greedy corporations. They proposed new legislation to expand Trump's authority over outsourcing decisions and block federal funding for any corporation moving jobs overseas. On the other side, moderate Republicans and Democrats blasted the move. They warned that Trump's aggressive intervention in private business decisions would set a dangerous precedent. Some accused the president of violating free market principles and weaponizing federal power to punish corporate dissent. The fight spilled into cable news, Senate hearings, and press conferences. Ford executives were dragged before Congress and grilled by both sides. Economic policy debates devolved into political shouting matches. Meanwhile, the American public grew angrier, watching Washington implode while their jobs and retirement accounts hung in the balance. But as political chaos consumed Capitol Hill, the crisis quickly spiraled beyond American borders. The global trade war, Ford's corporate standoff with the U.S. government, triggered a global domino effect that no one could stop. As Trump's tariffs loomed and Washington descended into gridlock, America's key trading partners retaliated. The European Union, outraged by Trump's demands on Ford, slapped new tariffs on American vehicles and agricultural products. Canada and Mexico imposed their own counter-tariffs on American steel, aluminum, and auto parts. China, sensing an opportunity, introduced massive subsidies for its domestic EV manufacturers and blocked American vehicle imports entirely. The global trade war, once simmering, now exploded in full force. Prices of cars, trucks, and essential goods skyrocketed worldwide. American exporters saw orders dry up. Small businesses that depended on international trade were devastated. Global financial markets nosedived as investors feared a prolonged trade war would sink economic growth. What began as a political confrontation between Trump and Ford had become an international economic crisis. But the greatest casualty of all was Ford itself, the death of an icon. When the dust finally began to settle, Ford Motor Company was unrecognizable. The financial toll was catastrophic. Ford's stock price plummeted by nearly 50%. Its overseas operations were shuttered or scaled back under government pressure. Supply chains collapsed, production costs soared, and consumer confidence evaporated. Internally, the crisis tore the company apart. Senior executives resigned. Thousands of workers lost their jobs. Ford's future EV product launches were delayed by years, allowing competitors like Tesla and Hyundai to dominate the market. But beyond the balance sheets, Ford faced a far deeper wound: the collapse of its cultural identity. For over 100 years, Ford had stood as a symbol of American innovation and strength. Now it was a cautionary tale of corporate overreach, political warfare, and economic fragility. Some experts speculated Ford might never recover. Its reputation was in tatters, its market share was gutted, and its role as an American industrial icon was shattered. This battle between Ford and Donald Trump is far from over. But one thing is clear: the future of American manufacturing is on the line. Will Ford survive this political and economic war, or will it become the next corporate casualty? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation. And if you want to stay ahead of these unfolding economic battles, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button.